Have you ever picked up a hitchhiker? I've never actually seen anyone with their thumb up on the side of the road before. Truthfully, I'd pick them up in a heartbeat if they were heading my direction though. I've only ever picked up people in need. And never with them asking. I remember I just got thrashed by this girl I was interested in high school. After about 2 weeks of her goading me to tell her I liked her, she replied with good. Now that we've gotten that out in the open. And nothing else. She just wanted me to say it, yeah, no. Cause you do. Right? I see this guy who is riding his flat through Main Street towards the next biggest area in our suburb. Knowing the area, I pulled up next to him and asked him if he needed help. He said no. That he was just going to drive slowly up to the next gas station and fill up. I told him to wait here. And I drove ahead. Found out there wasn't a gas station at that gas station. I went back and told him. And insisted he pull out on the side of the road. Helped him change his flat tire and we took that and his spare and loaded them up. I drove him to the closest gas station and helped him pump his tires up. No problem. Turns out he was there because he was in the area doing a job upgrading the software at a hospital. And had stayed late to check in on his mother who was there in hospice. His wife was at some big meeting and she was waiting on him to pick her up. Basically his night would have been fucked without someone to lend him a hand. The other time I was dropping my then girlfriend off at 3 in the morning after a rowdy fuck session. And we saw some poor guy get out of his car in nothing but a windbreaker and jeans. And it was windy as fuck and in February. After I dropped her off, I went back to swing along the expressway to try and find him to see if he needed help. I thought I'd lost him. But he was shivering his ass off all of 300 yards from where I'd last seen him. His buddy told him he'd go get him some gas, but he just pocketed this guy's $20 and bought some pot instead. This crazy motherfucker was about to try and walk 4 miles through a snowy city to try to get back to his house. Poor guy wouldn't stop thanking me the whole ride. He even smoked me out on the way. Only time I've ever been worried was when some kid literally ran up to my car and nervously asked me to drive him to his house because his girlfriend was in trouble or some such. I hesitantly said yes, I'm a sucker for a sob story, and drove him towards his house. It's just behind that giant superstore. The one that's closed. Yeah. Just go around back near the drop-off soccer AII. Then we get there. He refuses to get out. Basically just kept thanking me. Then asked for money because his girlfriend needs medication. At this point he's totally taking advantage of the kindness of a stranger. But I'm thinking shit. This motherfucker brought me behind an abandoned superstore in the shittiest part of town. Now he's got his seatbelt off in my car and I don't doubt he would pull a knife on me at any minute judging by how desperate he was. He got out after I'd given him my emergency stash of small bills that I keep in my visor. But damn. Never been so nervous to pick up a hitchhiker before. I've actually picked up about 18 hitchhikers in the past 3 years. I went to Rutgers University and it all started one night after I finished a very late summer class. There are 4 campuses and each are spread pretty far apart, so the school has a very modern bus system to shuttle students around. In the summer, however, most students go home and the buses run very infrequently at night. So, as I left class in my mom's minivan, I noticed that the last bus was pulling away to take kids back to the student center. And there was a Korean student running after the bus. The driver didn't see him and as I drove past I could see that he just sat on the bench. Waiting for another bus to come. The next one wasn't until 6:30 in the morning. I stopped the van and did a U-turn and pulled up to the stop. I powered down the window and asked him if he needed a lift to the student center. He was a bit hesitant at first. I guess it's not every day a black guy pulls up in the dead of night to offer free rides and AC equals. So we drive and we start to talk and find out that we have a lot in common. I dropped him off and he offered to pay me. But I just told him to pay it forward to the next person he sees in need. That summer the city of New Brunswick was really hot. I had to cancel a class that day because it was the last day to do so. And Rutgers bureaucracy made it so I had to go to 3 different campuses that day in order to do it for some strange reason. Anyway. On my way to drop off the final form I saw an older white man in his 50s with crutches and his leg in a cast walking down the street. I could see that he was struggling and it was so hot outside. I couldn't just let him suffer while I sat there in my 7-seater air-conditioned minivan. So I pulled over and asked him if he needed a ride. This big genuine smile came over his face. And he thanked me numerous times. And thanked God a few times too. He apparently broke his leg and had a compound fracture after falling off his son's roof while trying to help him install a satellite dish. Nuts. The next time I picked up people was May of the following year during Rutgers Fest, where the school hires popular bands and hip hop stars to perform for tens of thousands of students. It was amazing. I always have a great time and I always invite my friends from Princeton to come. This Rutgers Fest they drove their own cars from Princeton and brought a few other classmates, so I was alone in the minivan again. As I was driving back to the College Avenue Student Center I noticed that there were hundreds of students that were walking back along the highway. Apparently they didn't feel like waiting for the buses and decided to take their chances. So here I am watching this sea of kids walking back along the highway. As the sun began to set, I turned the minivan around after reaching New Brunswick and sat in traffic for a while, which I should have anticipated. When I was finally clear of the traffic I pulled over to the side of the road and honked. I waved my hand outside the window to a group of 5 kids I saw in my rearview mirror. They looked confused at first. And then one of them realized that I was trying to help them and started running to the van. And the others followed him. I asked if they needed a lift and they were really overjoyed that I was helping them out. They each gave me their hands to shake and I drove them back to campus, where they shook my hand again and thanked me for helping them out. I did this 2 more times. And each group was really happy. I decided that it may be time to go back home and take the 45-minute drive back to Hillside, as the sun had already set. But something almost compelled me to go back one more time. Just one more time. So I did. And unfortunately most of the groups of kids were way too big to all fit in the van. So I drove back to campus with no one. But this feeling, just one more time, you have to go back, just kept gnawing at my soul. So I went back and saw this one kid by himself. It was pitch black out, but I could see that he was angry as he was throwing bottles under a bridge on the way back. I drove past him about 100 feet and thought to myself, are you really sure he deserves your help? I thought back to all the lessons in church I had about helping people in need and not judging people, so I decided to take a leap of faith and against common sense to help this kid out. I was on the side of the highway now and I reversed parallel to him. He was so mad that he didn't even notice and he kept on throwing rocks and bottles at the concrete in the distance. I honked the horn and asked him if he needed a ride. He was startled and I could see that he wasn't crazy after all. He said that his friends ditched him and he was forced to walk back along the highway. I told him to hop in and he thanked me a lot and occasionally turned to look at me, sort of like I was a very unexpected angel. I dropped him off near the student center and shook his hand. He thanked me again, and I told him to take it easy and to pay it forward to someone else in need. All these events really made me feel good and reaffirmed my faith in humanity and God too. They were all just simple acts of kindness. A simple car ride. But there was just something about being that unexpected stranger, that good Samaritan that didn't just think about helping others, but actually gathered up the courage to turn my thoughts of compassion into reality that really had profound effects on my life. Those times I picked up those strangers, we went from being black or white, Hispanic, or Asian to just being people glad to be in each other's company by the end of the trip. I've always appreciated moments like that. I hope you have too. Equals. I have given 2 different strangers rides. The first was a homeless man that had a bag full of empties and was trying to get to the store, but his bag ripped a mile from his destination. The second was a guy that tried to sell me some crack and pot outside a bar. I gave him a ride back to his house on the outskirts of town. I actually had really great conversations with both of these guys. Mostly about their criminal pasts and the downward cyclic spiral that the justice system forces them into. I'm going into forensics, so we actually had really constructive talks. First time I picked up hitchhikers was when I was in Banff on a court and decided to go skiing. I had reserved a small rental car, but ended up with a Dodge Charger that looked like a hearse. On my way back to town from the hill I saw a couple of kids with snowboards in their gear, offered them a ride and they were dumbfounded, reading themselves to walk quite a ways carrying their boards. They told me that they always walk because nobody ever stops for them with their boards. By chance I had this massive rental car and lots of time to kill. The look of stunned appreciation from people not expecting a favor is awesome. I have a buddy who used to drive trucks across Texas. One day while leaving Austin, he picked up a little squirrely looking black dude who said he was going 90 miles north. About 5 minutes into the ride, the little squirrely guy goes, "You ever had a boy suck your dick?" Double quote. Yeah. My then girlfriend was feeling randy and wanted to have a threesome. This would be an all-girl threesome, okay? No boys allowed. We were on a super long drive and got ourselves horny as hell talking and laughing about it, when fate sends us this cute as a button hitchhiker. Short blonde hair. Looking very dusty and tired from hiking. Sexy as hell in other words. So with halfway serious, halfway what the hell intentions, we picked her up. Found out she was from Germany and she was going around to different parks in the country and doing some itinerant type work along the way. Oh, I should also say this was not in the USA. It was in a country where people can still do that sort of thing safely. They do still exist. Anyway, sorry to say, the cute German was not into it. She had places she needed to be. Believe me, we were every bit as disappointed as you are right now. Sigh. I know this will be at the bottom. That's just how life goes. I have somewhat similar story but different ending. Me and my dad always pick up hitchhikers. Always have and always will. We decided we were going to drive down to El Paso, from Salt Lake City, to see Tom Waits live. So obviously in the spirit of things, we were going to grab everybody we could. On the way we saw two ex-young punk kids outside of Phoenix. So we grabbed them. Turns out they're on their way to stand outside the concert hall that Tom Waits was playing at. This made us feel awesome. The second set of people were two ex-people who lived in the boondocks of nowhere. I believe they were 90 plus and all they were doing was getting groceries. One of them was in World War II. And they seemed happy as shit just baking in the sun waiting for a ride. This made us feel awesome. The third was a Hispanic dude in a broken down vehicle with two other Mexican dudes. He made the motions and implied it just ran out of gas. We're in the boondocks still. Nothing around for fucking miles. We take him all the way to the gas station and buy him a thing and a gallon of gas, and as soon as my dad hands it over he goes through his broken English and says thanks yaus and whatnot. Then the motherfucker just starts walking back towards his car like a champ. I'd say how far it was, but I'm not good with distance. And there's no way I would walk the distance in the hot sun. So we grab him and shuffle his ass back to the car and give him a ride back to his car. I think it was about a 15-minute drive on freeway, when we finally drop him off. And I'll never not hear this in my head when I think about it. He said in the best English that he knew I thank you. I love you. Double quote. Best road trip of my life. Edit. Lol. I'm at work and I started crying when I had to retype this. P.S. My dad is awesome. I never learned how to work with my hands or anything, but he taught me how to be an awesome person. Just about every time I see someone I stop. I kind of got out of the habit in the last couple of years. Moved to a big city and all that. My girlfriend wasn't too stoked on the practice. Then some shit happened to me that changed me and I am back to offering rides habitually. If you would indulge me. It is long story and has almost nothing to do with hitchhiking other than happening on a road. This past year I have had 3 instances of car trouble. A blowout on a freeway. A bunch of blown fuses and an out of gas situation. All of them were while driving other people's cars, which, for some reason, makes it worse on an emotional level. It makes it worse on a practical level as well. What with the fact that I carry things like a jack and extra fuses in my car, and know enough not to park facing downhill on a steep incline with less than a gallon of fuel. Anyway, each of these times this shit happened I was disgusted with how people would not bother to help me. I spent hours on the side of the freeway waiting, watching roadside assistance vehicles blow past me for AAA to show. The 4 gas stations I asked for a gas can told me that they couldn't loan them out for my safety, but I could buy a really shitty 1-gallon one with no cap for $15. It was enough each time to make you say shit like this country is going to hell in a handbasket. Double quote. But you know who came to my rescue all 3 times? Immigrants. Mexican immigrants. None of them spoke a lick of the language. But one of those dudes had a profound effect on me. He was the guy that stopped to help me with a blowout with his whole family of 6 in tow. I was on the side of the road for close to 4 hours. Big geep. Blown rear tire. Had a spare but no jack. I had signs in the windows of the car. Big signs that said need a jack and offered money. No dice. Right as I am about to give up and just hitch out there, a van pulls over and dude bounds out. He sizes the situation up and calls for his youngest daughter who speaks English. He conveys through her that he has a jack but it is too small for the Jeep, so we will need to brace it. He produces a saw from the van and cuts a log out of a downed tree on the side of the road. We rolled it over, put his jack on top, and bam. In business. I start taking the wheel off and, if you can believe it, I broke his tire iron. It was one of those collapsible ones and I wasn't careful and I snapped the head I needed clean off. Fuck. No worries. He runs to the van, gives it to his wife and she is gone in a flash. Down the road to buy a tire iron. She is back in 15 minutes. We finish the job with a little sweat and cussing. Stupid log was starting to give. And I am a very happy man. We are both filthy and sweaty. The wife produces a large water jug for us to wash our hands in. I tried to put a 20 in the man's hand but he wouldn't take it, so I instead gave it to his wife as quietly as I could. I thanked them up one side and down the other. I asked the little girl where they lived, thinking maybe I could send them a gift for being so awesome. She says they live in Mexico. They are here so mommy and daddy can pick peaches for the next few weeks. After that they are going to pick cherries then go back home. She asks if I have had lunch and when I told her no, she gave me a tamale from their cooler. The best fucking tamale I have ever had. So, to clarify, a family that is undoubtedly poorer than you, me, and just about everyone else on that stretch of road, working on a seasonal basis where time is money, took an hour or 2 out of their day to help some strange dude on the side of the road when people in tow trucks were just passing me by. Whoa. But we aren't done yet. I thank them again and walk back to my car and open the foil on the tamale cause I am starving at this point, and what do I find inside? My fucking $20 bill. I whirl around and run up to the van and the guy rolls his window down. He sees the $20 in my hand and just shaking his head no, like he won't take it. All I can think to say is poor favor. Poor favor. Poor favor with my hands out. Dude just smiles, shakes his head and, with what looked like great concentration, tried his hardest to speak to me in English. Today you. Tomorrow me. Double quote. Rolled up his window. Drove away. His daughter waving to me in the rear view. I sat in my car eating the best fucking tamale of all time and I just cried. Like a little girl. It has been a rough year and nothing has broke my way. This was so out of left field I just couldn't deal. In the 5 months since I have changed a couple of tires, given a few rides to gas stations and once went 50 miles out of my way to get the girl to an airport. I won't accept money. Every time I tell them the same thing when we are through. Today you. Tomorrow me. Double quote. TL. DR. Long rambling story about how the kindness of strangers, particularly folks from south of the border, Force me to be more helpful on the road and in life in general. I am sure it won't be as meaningful to anyone else, but it was seriously the highlight of my 2010. Edit. To the OP. Sorry to jack your thread. This has nothing to do with hitchhiking. I sort of thought I could just get this off my chest. Enjoy the catharsis and watch the story languish at the bottom of the page. Glad people like hearing the tale, and I hope it moves you to be more helpful in your day to day. Thanks for all the hitchhiker love on this thread. I am a dedicated hitcher. Have put in thousands of miles in the US. And just finished a 12,000 kilometers trip through Europe. I've picked up my fair share as well. Remember, if you see a hitchhiker, try to put yourself in their shoes. Craziest story. Got picked up by a Nazi who was going to pick up his Nazi friend who had been unsuccessful at hitchhiking for 2 days from a gas station by the freeway. The guy had a big ass walking stick with a big swastika-like shield on it. No wonder the dumbass didn't get picked up. However, the Nazis were nice to my girlfriend and I. The girlfriend is from south of Spain. So not exactly racially pure for these fuckos. In the end, the crazy Nazi with the swastika shield confessed he was in love with a black stripper. And when we got out, they gave us a beer. TL. Doctor got picked up by Nazis, everything went better than expected. They gave us a beer. Edit. Found a picture of me drinking the Nazi beer. Enjoy http. imgur. comu6f3v. JPG. Yes. Terrible idea. I was driving back into town one day and see this car on the side of the road about 30 minutes out. A little bit later I see this guy in a business suit carrying a duffel bag. So I slowed down cause I figured I was close and it's just some dude whose car ran out of gas a little too soon. Anyway, I pull over. He throws his bag in the back of my car. And I'm like, hey, where you headed? He just glares at me and says, just take me into town. So I was a little nervous and pretty annoyed. Then for some dumb reason I asked him what he had in the bag and he said none of your fucking business. So the whole rest of the drive I'm just thinking this can't be real. Thank God it was still light out. I was getting more and more nervous. We get into town. I stop at the first gas station cause I want him out of there as soon as possible at this point. And I drive away and make it home alive. Then later I go out to get my shit out of my car and realize the guy left his fucking bag. I was dropping a friend off at the airport. And some middle-aged guy with luggage came up to my car and asked for money for a taxi to where his hotel was. He kind of didn't know the city's geography. And the taxi would have cost around $80. He didn't look too happy when I told him that. And explained that he had just flown in from a job interview in Detroit. And was in town for another job interview the following day. After hemming and hawing, I let him jump in. And drove him the 40 miles to his hotel. He was apparently an engineer. Who, I kid you not, worked on rockets, the space shuttle, and other various flying things. He said he was on his last. And these job interviews were the last bit of hope for him. We just talked the whole time about his previous jobs. And various 3D rendering software technology. It was my first time picking up a hitchhiker. And he wasn't creepy at all. TLDR. Picked up a hitchhiker. Didn't even get a hand job. That is the sweetest hitchhiker story I've ever heard. Major props to you and your determination to help this guy. I've picked up plenty of hitchhikers in my life. One I remember was a 28-ish-year-old guy who was trying to get to Madison to be a test subject for a new ADD medication. Apparently they lock you up for a couple months. Regulate your diet and exercise. Then give you a few grand and set you free. You know. If the meds they're testing don't kill you. Anyway. I got him another 50 miles down the road before I had to turn south. He was nice though. This past June. Right before our wedding. My, now ex-husband picked up 3 crusty kids and their dog. They were hitching their way to a rainbow gathering. So he brought them home to me. We fed them and packed them goodie bags full of aspirin and hand sanitizer. Along with 10 pounds of dog food. then drove them to the next state. They were a nice bunch of kids. I've also not picked up hitchhikers who I thought were suspect. But I usually go to the nearest gas station and put together a bag of water, Gatorade and granola bars and bring it to them. Even if I think they look creepy, I still don't want them to go hungry. When I was 12 or 13, my dad and I were on our way home from somewhere a few hours away, and he decided it would be a good idea to pick up the hitchhiker on the side of the interstate holding a cardboard sign with the name of our town on it. As soon as we picked him up, it was obvious that he was homeless. He smelled terribly, and when asked him where he lived, he asked just to be dropped off downtown. His name was Steps. He turned out to be very nice and down to earth. He told us about hitchhiking all over the country and what he had seen. Before we dropped him off, we bought him some McDonald's and then never saw him again. My dad's first words when he got out of the car were, "Don't tell your mother about this." Double quote. Hitchhiking in 2 acts. Act I. Years ago I ran out of gas in the rain, so I started walking. An old guy in a beat up truck eventually stopped. Even though I wasn't hitching, I was soaked and still had a few miles to go. So what the hell? I was grateful. Then asked for the gas station at the next exit. He said his home was close, and he had gas there. He seemed kind, but I was young and pretty freaked. I think he sorta kept me on high alert on purpose, like he had a lesson he was trying to teach me. We got to his home without incident. He found a 5-gallon gas can full of fuel, then drove me back to my car. I was amazed. I offered him the only $10 I had in my wallet, but he declined. When I shook his hand, he palmed me a crisply folded $50 and said, "Hold on to this for me. If you need it, go ahead and use it. But if you can hang on to it for a while, pass it on. I'll be grateful." He left me holding the crisp $50 and a full gas can. And I never saw him again. Act I. A dozen or so years later, I'm driving home sometime after 11 o'clock at night on a Sunday. It's been snowing all day, and the interstate I'm on hasn't been plowed in hours. I'm doing 20 miles per hour and it's really coming down. Very few other idiots like me out on the road. I see red taillights way up ahead of me, then they float to the left, then right, then slip down below what should be the road. She slid right off the interstate and down an embankment. It took me a few minutes to finally spot her. The car was in one piece, right side up. For some reason I shut my car off when I pulled over. I remember because when I got out, it was that weird whisper quiet of a midnight snowfall. Then she started screaming. Later she told me, through sobs, that she thought I was going to kill her. At the time, all I could think of was that she was pinned inside the car and seriously injured. So I go stomping down through the snow as fast as possible, which causes her to scream even more. It was at least 15 minutes before she'll even roll down the window to talk to me. She bumped her head, but otherwise was okay. Her car wouldn't start and was very stuck. Anyway, I get her up to my car, and she gives me rough directions to her home, but is still really emotional. Then her cell phone rings. The guy on the other end is pissed she's not home yet. His yelling sets her off again. And then she's trying to explain the car wreck to this asshole. At first he doesn't believe her, calls her a cheating whore. She finally manages to convince him, but then he wants to know how the hell she's getting home. She explains me stopping to help, thinking I was going to murder her, and that now I'm driving her home. Asshole wants to know who I am. I offer my first name for the first time. Am I demanding a blowjob as payment? Just all kinds of madness. Eventually she hangs up the phone. Even more a mess, if it's possible, than when I found her at the bottom of the ditch. The next half hour to her place, doing 20 mph, was actually pretty amazing. She was trying to go back to school, get her shit together, dump that sorry sack she was going home to. She said in the first few minutes after the wreck, sitting lonely in the silence of snowfall, that she thought she was going to die. Either because of the weather or because she should just go ahead and take her own life. When she first saw me and thought I was going to kill her, she realized she wanted to live, and that she still had a life worth fighting for. She grabbed my hand, started sobbing again, and thanked me for saving her life. We pulled into her driveway, and she hugged me and thanked me again. I pulled out my wallet and gave her a crisply folded $50. Hold on to this for me. If you need it, go ahead and use it. But if you can hang on to it for a while, pass it on. I'll be grateful. Double quote. I've had low times when I've needed it, and used every last penny. But eventually I'd get ahead a bit, and restock with a new, crisply folded $50. I've been carrying the same $50 for probably 5 years now. This thread reminds me that I keep it for you, not me. I think it's time to pass it on again. Thank you. OP. I doubt anyone will read this, but here it goes. A couple of years ago I was catching a bus to go home from my last class of the day, and I got off to switch buses at a station. I see this man with graying hair looking around, obviously lost. He was carrying a clear plastic bag with something wet inside. Upon closer inspection I notice that he's pretty dirty and wearing some sandals that are very common in rural Mexico. He has graying hair. He notices me looking at him and figured I spoke Spanish too. Which was true. He told me that he had recently crossed the border and had been traveling in a van that was to drop him off in Yakima, Washington. Apparently his family couldn't pay the toll in time and the driver kicked him out in Tacoma, where we were, without telling him where he was or anything. Apparently they would have probably killed him, but it was daytime so they just left him stranded. I was expecting him to just ask me for money, but instead he asked me to tell him how to get to the Greyhound so he could get to Yakima. If not, he wanted to know how to get to Seattle to stay in a shelter someone else told him about earlier. I explained to him that if he waited for a minute I would find out and tell him. I tried calling several people to see where he could stay that was in town and not too far. I also tried to figure out where the Greyhound was. Eventually I ended up giving him directions on how to catch a bus to Seattle because that was what he decided to do. I tried to give him about $15 for food and he would not take them. I even offered him a room in my house for the night so he could shower and change clothes. Maybe try to contact his family in Yakima. He said he had worked for everything in his life and couldn't take things for free. So I wrote a note in English explaining that he was on his way to Seattle and that he did not speak English. I even wrote my number on it so if he got lost or stranded again he could call me. I kept wishing that I had a car so I could give him a ride to where he might catch a bus to Yakima. I never heard from him again, but I hope that he made it to where he was going. First time I offered a person a ride was when this big girl was sobbing her eyes outside a city bank I go to regularly. She was surrounded by a lot of adults, and seeing it that I was the youngest and didn't have any job duties, I volunteered to drive this young lady home. So she sat in my car still crying and saying I don't want to get hurt anymore repeatedly. I'm not the best person to cheer someone up, but I managed to say it'll be alright. So as I drove her back to her place, she started opening up and saying bits and pieces of what happened. From what I understood, she was 26 years old. Got pregnant in high school at 16. Her parents disowned her. She's pregnant again, hence the big part. And her boyfriend is now leaving her. At this point, she was really comfortable about telling me her life story. And she asked if I could drive around some more or stop by a park so we can talk. Being the nice guy, I said sure. And then she asked another favor. To buy her a pack of smokes and a few drinks. I was 20 at the time. And then she asked me to drive her to a cell phone company, forgot the company's name, to add more minutes to her temporary phone. By this time, I felt like a bitch. Anyways, I said I had to go back for dinner because it was getting late and she sorta hinted that she didn't want me to go. Lol. I insisted and I finally drove her back to her place. Then this Mexican guy comes out of the apartment who I believe to be her boyfriend. And she says to me, oh shit. He's going to kill you. But yeah, I didn't care and he came up to my car. She got out. They hugged. And he looked at me and said thanks. My first time giving someone a ride. FML. Second time I offered someone a ride was because I was overgenerous. I work out late at the 24-hour fitness gym. Usually around 2 to 3 AM. I saw this guy leave at the same time as I was. But he was carrying a suitcase. So I shouted at him because he was pretty far in the parking lot, "Do you need a ride?" Now. He turned around immediately and headed straight for me. I felt a little happy thinking I was going to help someone out tonight. He came up to my face and said, "Are you gay? You shouldn't be asking people if they need rides." And he walked away. There's more stories, but these first two are probably the most memorable. I also had to hitchhike when I hit a deer in Jasper and was 200 miles from civilization. It was -30 out and I had no signal. Luckily a family stopped and drove me 200 miles to town. Otherwise I surely would have died overnight. The guy turned out to be a Mountie. I was in the car with my brother when we picked up a hitchhiker. His name was Cameron. Was trying to get to the local bus stop to get on a bus to see his girlfriend. I think he was 18 or so. No complications whatsoever. It was a 5-minute car ride. We just made some small talk. After we dropped him off, my brother said to him, "Have a nice life." I thought it was funny at the time. But then I realized that I was never going to see that guy in my life again, which is still a ridiculous idea to me whenever I think of it. Sorry, mine isn't as interesting as some others. Spoke with a tourist I met here in Australia. And he was telling me of two backpackers who decided to travel up north separately. But by hitchhiking. They would be picked up by random cars and trucks. And sometimes one would progress hundreds of kilometers ahead of the other. While at other times they discovered they were in the same town. There was even an instance where one had been given a ride in a semi-trailer. And found his friend walking along a remote highway. Reunited. Yes, I did it once and I'll never do it again. I just got off of an 11 PM work shift and had to drive 15 minutes home. I stopped at a gas station and a 30-35-year-old African American male said he was stranded and needed a car ride back to his house to get money. I knew the story sounded weird, but I said, "Hey, what the hell, let's help this guy out." I had half a joint left and sparked it up and offered him some. He took a hit with me and we continued on our way. As we were driving he was really fidgety and anxious. He kept rubbing his leg back and forth and rubbing the back of his head as if he was waiting for something. I thought to myself, God damn it, this guy is going to rob me. My son was a few months old at the time and his rattle was rattling in his empty car seat in the back. I told the guy about it and talked a little about my son. The dude was making me nervous by his body language. I told myself I'd flip the truck over before he'd steal my shit. I had my seatbelt on and he didn't. I ended up taking the guy to this neighborhood and he was looking at all these houses. I kept asking if that's the one or not because the dude had me on high alert at this point. Just a weird situation. Anyway, he asked me for some money so I gave him $10. I'm pretty sure he wanted to rob me by his behavior in the car. I'd like to think between smoking him out, my son's rattle making noises, and me giving him $10 he changed his mind. I still remember his face and looked for him on the news or newspaper. Never again will I give a stranger a ride home. Fuck that. On my road trip to LA from NJ I happened upon a hitchhiker. He was old, maybe 60, and walking in the middle of the desert in Texas. He had no backpack. No nothing. Just the clothes on his back. I passed him at first, but quickly slammed on my brakes and put it in reverse. I figure an elderly man walking in the middle of the desert isn't looking to rob, rape, or kill anyone. Once I pulled over he began jogging toward my car, but with a limp. I could already see the damage the sun had done to his unprotected face through my rear view mirror. Once he got in the car he immediately thanked me. You could hear the desperation and dehydration in his voice. I gave him a bottle of water and then asked where he was headed. Before I could finish my sentence he had finished the water. He said he was headed to Phoenix to go back home to his wife. He had this deep southern accent akin to Boomhauer from King of the Hill. Since I had family in Gilbert and was headed that way to begin with, I figure what's the big deal? It was only going to be an extra hour of driving. At first he was very short with answering the questions that I asked. Not that he was rude. Just exhausted. When asked how many miles he had walked since his last ride, he replied with relief, only 60, as if expecting to walk 200. I had a McDonald's gift card that my girlfriend sent me for the road trip, which I didn't consider using because McDonald's is a diarrhea factory and I wanted to make good time without having to shit on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere every 5 minutes. But this guy looked like he hadn't had a meal in a day or two. I pulled to the drive-thru of the next one I came across and asked him to order anything he liked. He seemed to become more chipper and have more energy once the opiates from the cheese hit him. And I must confess to the purchase of some French fries for myself. After that McDonald's stop there were no more rest stops or gas stations for miles. About 2 hours into the journey through the desert my car began to stall out. Looking at my quarter tank of gas I couldn't figure why my car was acting up. Before my road trip I had my uncle, mechanic his whole life, look over my car and fix everything that needed to be fixed. Change the fluids. The whole nine. I naturally had a GPS and ran a search for the nearest gas station, which was 22 miles away. Trust me when I say my car sounded like it couldn't even make one more mile. I immediately started going in the direction of the suggested route. Keep in mind there is nothing but desert and mountains as far as the eye can see. My car kept on putting its way like those sickly cars what you see in cartoons. At that moment I realized why getting cheap gas doesn't pay off in the long run. Clearly it was a bad mix and my car was trying to burn something that couldn't. After stalling several times I eventually reached my destination. And it was the smallest fucking town I had ever seen. The gas station was there just like the GPS said. Well, at least what was ever left from the fire that hit it maybe about 5 months prior. All while this is going on my guest just kinda sat there quietly. Probably too nervous to say anything and fear of possibly adding to my frustration. I stall again. I get out and walk a little bit. Taking my keys of course. I don't walk more than 50 feet before finding the first sign of life. A man watering his pavement. Yes. He was watering his pavement. Again. Small fucking town in the middle of nowhere. I asked if the gas station that burnt down was the only one in town and to my delight it was not. There was one more about a mile into town. I got in my car and with a putter my engine turned over and got me the rest of the way. Once I got to the gas station I loaded up on some snacks and drinks knowing I still had about 10 hours of driving ahead of me. By the way, at the checkout in the gas station bar grocery store, I asked the attendant how many people live in town. He said 315. He knew the exact fucking number. They had a population smaller than my high school. Anyway, having that old man hitchhiker in the car while all that was going on made it seem much more like an adventure. It gave me a little more motivation to solve the problem rather than just calling AAA. Don't really know why. Just did. From that point on it was smooth sailing. Once we got back on the road we began the awkward dance of finding a common musical interest that we can tolerate for the next 10 hours until we reach Phoenix. I mainly enjoy music like Justice and Kavinsky on these long road trips. Electro keeps me awake. Being the southern type he liked country. I'd rather be raped. Lo and behold there was one group we both shared a common affinity for. Leave it to the Beatles. With there only being about 2 hours left until we reached Phoenix I began to pry about why an elderly man such as himself was hitchhiking in the first place. Turns out he was younger than he looked. He was 53. But man was his story sad. Having lost his job of 20 years as a janitor he moved to Tennessee to work at a construction site. At his age. I guess maybe due to budget cut about a third of their workers got shit canned only after about 7 months after the start of the project. Probably to be replaced by cheaper labor. In these economic times I bet people would work for just about any wage. He had no other choice but to head back home. With his last check in hand he headed to the back to cash it in order to fund his trip back home. With a good chunk of change in his pocket he purchased a Greyhound bus ticket and gave a call to his wife tell her he is on his way. Once the bus started to board, tragedy struck. 2 guys jumped him. probably having seen his cash while he was paying for his ticket. He put up a fight, defending of course the only money he had left to his name, only then to get stabbed twice in the chest. He almost died and had to spend about a month in the hospital to recover without having any health insurance whatsoever. He racked a bill I am sure in the thousands. Side note. I raged when he told me about the fat fuck security guard at Greyhound that just witnessed all this without doing a goddamn thing. He showed me the scars on his chest. The hospital kicked him out as soon as they could. Because fuck the poor and destitute. America rules. His wife was barely making the rent. So he decided instead of burdening her with the cost of having to buy him a bus ticket, he decided to hitch it. From Tennessee to Texas, only truckers picked him up and dropped him off at whatever rest stop they stumbled upon before diverting in a direction other than west. I was the only passenger vehicle to stop for him. I am glad that I picked up a hitchhiker. It made me feel good doing something for a complete stranger in need for no reason other than for the common good. Just remember, there are fucked up people in this world. People who will do bad things in the face of charity and kindness. But there are also people who are just down on their luck looking for a ride home. Wherever that may be. And for those of you who are wondering, his name was Walter. Today you, tomorrow me. Just makes my heart sing. Probably no one will read my story in a thread this size, but I feel like telling it anyway. I was driving home for Christmas from college once and about 30 miles from home. At an intersection on the outskirts of a mid-sized town, I saw what was unmistakably a body. It lay some distance from the road on a snowy field. Motionless. I pulled over, walked to the edge of the road, and called out, "Hey, are you okay?" Not expecting an answer, but I had no idea what to do. I had no cell phone and it was quiet and freezing. And I was alone. As soon as I called out, a head popped up out of the snow. A dude dressed in a soldier uniform carrying a big rucksack starts running at me full tilt, yelling, "Ride? Ride?" I was thoroughly freaked but told him of course, and he got in. I cranked the heat to try to warm him up and we started down the road. While he shook and shook, it turned out he was heading for my tiny hometown where his wife was living. But couldn't find any bus or train routes that directly connected to it. It's really just a bump in the road. He'd been out there in the cold for quite a while before getting too cold and tired to even stand. A uniformed soldier couldn't get anyone to stop and give him a ride in winter on a rural road. The only reason that made any sense, although neither of us said it, was because he was a very dark-skinned man and my hometown's in a very white state. It made me feel sad and ashamed. I also felt ashamed because I was scared of him too. I'd been in sketchy situations with dudes, and every time I felt so stupid. And now I was driving alone with a man who'd been a corpse in my mind just moments before. I started to hear a true crimes narrator in my head saying her family was waiting for her by the Christmas tree, but she was never seen again. Blah blah blah. So I was scared. And hating myself for being stupid. And also hating myself for being scared just like every other jerk who'd left him there to freeze. I started leaning heavier and heavier on the gas pedal, and then, out of nowhere, there were police lights in my rear view pulling me over. I was dumb enough to be relieved until the cop shined his light on us, made a face, and then shined his light on the soldier's bag where an open container of Jack sat clearly visible. I explained, in my scared little white girl way, that I didn't know it was there. That I didn't know the man in my car. But he'd been freezing by the road and I was just trying to get us both home. And that fucker went and wrote me a ticket. Then he drove off in the opposite direction, instead of taking the soldier home himself or following us on the desolate road to be sure everything was okay. My internal monologue started right up again. At 4:53 p.m. her vehicle was pulled over by Officer Dickhead, who observed a large male in her passenger seat. Dickhead was the last person to see her alive. Now he's being sued by the grieving family for $1 billion. Then I looked at the soldier's face, and it was sadder and more scared than mine. Soon enough we get to my little town, and I drive him to his wife's house. We've barely spoken, But he takes out a fistful of cash and insists on paying for the ticket. I started crying. But he wouldn't let me give it back. When I got to my family and tried to tell them what happened, they just gave me that all too familiar "you're too stupid to live" look. Because obviously I'd narrowly escaped certain death by picking up a man who would have certainly been dead otherwise. For the life of me, I don't know why I told them. I knew better. I still stop when someone needs help. And I've been lucky that people have always stopped for me. I live 2,500 miles from my hometown now, in Oregon. As a matter of fact, where Rona just become my favorite neighbor. I don't know. I don't go back for holidays. I like Christmas a lot more these days. I live in Japan and I once picked up two guys hitchhiking. They had come from Okinawa, at the very southern end. Hitched all the way up to Hokkaido and were now hitching back. When I dropped them off, they gave me a candy bar. And we posed for photos because they were collecting pictures of everyone who gave them lifts along the way. This was kinda a pay it forward thing for me. Because in Australia our Japanese exchange student got lost one time and some random guy picked him up and drove him to our house. Dropped him off and drove off again without ever saying anything. This kid spoke no English either. I used to pick up hitchhikers with my friend in his old Beta car. The key would slide out of the ignition when it was turned on. It was so worn out, so we used to pick people up, give them a beer and converse until they asked where we were going. Then we told them that we just broke out of jail. No key, lol, stole the car. Once a guy jumped out of the car at about 20 miles per hour. He was so scared. My roommate, a straight-laced, straight-A girl, and I were at the college grocery one night at about 1 AM buying foodstuffs. When a very skinny woman approached me. She said she and her husband had their car repossessed in the lot. And will I give them a ride to their apartment, about 3 miles away. So I tell them, sure, let me finish up, and I'll give them a ride. My roommate was having none of it, and was very upset. I told her, it's okay. Shit happens to people. Sometimes you should just be nice. Double quote. So we finish at the checkout, get the bags and the people, go to my car, and drive them to the apartment. They get out. No harm done. About 2 weeks later, I'm back at the grocery with my roommate. And the same woman with a different man comes up. Same story. Car repossessed, etc. I tell them, sure, I'll give you a ride. Just don't lie. He's not your husband. You used this line on me a couple of weeks ago. I don't know what he is. And I don't want to know. But sure, I'll do it. She was taken aback. And seemed surprised. But accepts anyway. Again. Roommate is pissed. Again, no incidents. I suspect the woman was a prostitute. And these were her Johns. But who am I to judge? As long as they don't hurt anyone, I don't care. For the past year I've tried to pull over when I see someone buy a broken down car. I don't drive much, but I've probably pulled over about 15 times. This past summer I was on my way back to school and saw a guy who was sitting in his car on the side of the road, so I pull over to see if he needs any help. He was broken down, had no phone, and was 2 hours from his home, so I'll let him use my phone to call whoever he needed. I've always thought that I wouldn't pick up a hitchhiker because, well, I don't know what would happen. But after he got off the phone I asked if he needed anything else and he asked for a ride to the nearest gas station, 20 minutes away. I didn't even think about it and told him to get in the car. If I had thought before answering, I doubt I would have offered. But I gave him a ride and no trouble came to me. I felt terrible for the guy. He was 25 and was already divorced and lived 3 hours from his kids. So every other weekend he drove 3 hours in his early 90s piece of shit car to see his kids. I knew he hated his life except for his kids. Good God, I could tell he loved his kids. I can only hope that someday I'm as loving of a father as he is. I used to give rides, but I have since stopped after one crazy encounter. I picked up this young white dude who was probably around 20-25 on the outskirts of Memphis heading south. I was on my way home from work, so it was late in the afternoon. I typically stopped on the way home and got a 6-pack. From time to time I'd crack open a cold one for the ride since it was the better part of an hour. The young man said he had been hitching since California and was on his way to his sister's in Florida with a job lined up at Disney. I asked him how his journey had been thus far, to which he started in on why he left California. This is also when I realized this dude was batshit crazy and I needed to drop him off sooner rather than later. He tells me how his wife cheated on him with a lawyer and eventually left and divorced him for said lawyer. After the wife-lawyer team cleaned him out, he decided to get the fuck out of California as the lawyer was using his connections to try and get dude thrown in jail. Then he described how the lawyer had hired private eyes and other non-savory types to try and entrap him as he crossed the country. He even said a one-man whirlybird had followed him across most of Arkansas and he had to travel at night to avoid being spotted by it. The further he got into the story, the more agitated he seemed to become. It was troubling to say the least. I always carried a pistol in my truck and it was easily within reach, but I figured my best bet to avoid being stabbed by this dude was to out crazy him. I cracked open a brew, offered him one and started with my story I was making up as I went. I told him I knew how he must feel having been cheated on. I went on that I'd been out of the joint for about 6 months and was adjusting well. He asked me what I was in for and I told him I'd gotten really drunk, blacked out, and when I came to I had went crazy with a box cutter on my ex and the dude she was cheating on me with. He got really quiet and didn't really say anything else until we got to my town. I dropped him off at the truck stop near the interstate and never saw him again. TL. Doctor out crazy the hitchhiker and most likely won't be picking up another one. I picked up a guy down in Dayton and drove him 30 miles north. He smelled funny but was nice. He was telling me about this driver in Tennessee who purposely hit him with their car. He had a huge gash on his arm that looked gnarly. As chance would have it, I had recently got a piercing, so I had a tube of Neosporin with me. It wasn't much, but I gave it to him when I dropped him off. I was a tad nervous picking up an older male hitchhiker since I am a female and at the time I was maybe 19, but I am glad I did it. When I was younger my mom brought home 2 hitchhikers and they stayed with us for a few days. So maybe it's genetic. I picked up some guy by my school once who needed a ride to his apartment about 10-15 minutes away. Not really as cool a story as yours. But he needed to get back to his apartment because his brother's kids were being dropped off there by a bus and he would have missed them otherwise. He ended up talking to me about how DNA is like a programming language. I'm a software engineering major, and like all programming languages someone needs to give it meaning for it to do anything. That's why he believed in God. Someone had to give DNA meaning, or else it wouldn't do anything at all. I thought it was a pretty interesting concept. Though I still don't believe in God.